It's a parent's worst nightmare.
Their children just being taken away.
He gets in it like it's his own vehicle.
A man steals a car with 2 young children inside.
Every second, this situation gets more dangerous.
Where is he taking them?
Just thinking that I was never going to see my kids again.
And then a woman decides she's had enough.
When I first saw this video, I couldn't believe it.
She's like, he is not getting away with this. I'm going to be the one to take him down.
And she's standing up for all women.
There have been so many times where we've been harassed. I guess it was just all instinct.
July 22nd, 2018. It's business as usual at a gas station in Midvale, Utah, near Salt Lake City.
So it's a typical day, middle of the day. The security camera's rolling.
Surveillance cameras capture a man walking from the street up to a white car at a pump.
He's not really running. He doesn't look suspicious. He walks up to the car and nonchalantly gets into the car and then starts to drive away.
But there's a big problem. The car isn't his. And even worse, it's not empty. Inside are 13-year-old Jocelyn Milam and her 6-month-old baby sister, Ivy.
You step away for a moment and a complete stranger jumps into the car and drives off. This is terrifying.
It was the worst feeling in the world. I can't express that feeling of your children just being taken away without you being able to do something about it.
Their mother, Heather Cameron, is inside the store paying for her gas when she sees her car driving away. At first, she thinks her teenager is behind the wheel.
I'm not gonna lie, at first I thought my daughter was, playing a prank. I'm like, what is she doing? And then I ran out and I started panicking.
But the car, with her 2 young daughters still inside, has pulled out of the gas station and disappeared down the busy road.
I wanted to chase after the car, but I knew that it was going faster than what I could run. All I wanted was my girls.
911 emergency.
Someone in the store calls 911, and police immediately issue an urgent multi-agency alert.
It's a crime in progress. We're going to send that broadcast out to every single agency so officers can start flooding to that area.
While police launch a desperate search for the girls, investigators review the surveillance footage and are stunned by this brazen act.
It's not the middle of the night in a creepy, weird part of the city. This is a normal gas station. He gets in it like it's his own vehicle and then drives off out of there.
Just minutes earlier, Heather had left Jocelyn in the car to feed baby Ivy in the back seat while she ran into the store.
It was hot that day, so I kept the car going for them because it was hot. I just figured my girls are safe in a cool car. I'm right here going in to go pay for gas.
We've all done this before. We're thinking we're just gonna be gone for 1-2 minutes. Nothing's gonna happen.
Gas station employees recognize the suspect as a homeless man who lurks around the property, but they know nothing else about him.
And this is a true stranger abduction, so we don't even know who this person is that has taken them.
And it's not clear if this man just wanted to steal the car or if he's going after the 2 children inside.
As an investigator, unfortunately, we think of the worst case scenario.
Who is this man? And where is he taking the girls now?
As he pulled out of the gas station, he went north on State Street, which is a main street that runs through the entire Salt Lake Valley.
This situation is so intense and dangerous. What's gonna happen to them?
As law enforcement searches for the stolen car, they know that time is critical.
It's a kidnapping, it's panic. Every single second counts.
I just remember the whole time just thinking in my head that I was never going to see my kids again.
July 22nd, 2018. Heather Cameron is inside a gas station store when a man steals her car. With daughters, 13-year-old Jocelyn and 6-month-old Ivy inside.
I was definitely helpless. I didn't know what to do.
As police frantically search for the stolen vehicle, Jocelyn is terrified she'll never see her mom again.
Honestly, I didn't know for sure if the police were gonna find me.
The nightmare begins while she's feeding her baby sister in the back of the car. And suddenly, a strange man hops into the driver's seat.
The door opens, the guy gets in, and at first I think it's my mom. And then I do a double take because he automatically, starts driving.
Terrified, Jocelyn screams at the car thief to stop.
I was worried he was gonna hurt us. And I was also worried that he was gonna keep us. I was like, okay, you can have me, but not my baby sister.
She starts to negotiate with the guy. She's talking about how, take me, don't take my little sister. And what that does on a deeper level, it humanizes her. So he's seeing this as a family and not just a car.
But the man ignores Jocelyn and keeps driving. Jocelyn doesn't know what to do until she notices her mother's phone is still sitting on the front passenger seat. That's when she makes a bold move.
I snatched the phone because I didn't want him having the phone. And so I just dial 911, put the phone down, and I leave it there so they can listen.
Because the kidnapper never sees her grab the phone, he has no idea that now the police can hear everything. So Jocelyn starts screaming for help.
The dispatch also can immediately start working on is an emergency ping on the phone, and we can get location information with that.
But because she doesn't know if anyone will find them in time, Jocelyn makes another daring decision. With the kidnapper still driving, she rolls down and leans halfway out the window.
I flail my arms out and I'm hanging out of it, and I'm screaming at the top of my lungs for help.
When nobody notices her, the frantic 13-year-old quietly tries to use her own cell phone to call her dad. Thankfully, he picks up.
And she's telling me she doesn't know where she's at, and I freaked out.
Jared doesn't know what is going on, but he immediately pulls up the shared location app on his phone to try and see exactly where his daughter is.
My one thought was get to Joss, so I just put the pinpoint on her and ran out the door.
To her dad's relief, the phone shows that Jocelyn is still in the area.
She was about a mile away from as far as I could see. And I just hightailed it, just gone, as fast as I can go.
Meanwhile, his courageous 13-year-old tries something else to get the car thief to stop.
So I just started hitting him. I hit him as hard as I can on the top of the head.
The man still doesn't say anything, but he does do something surprising.
I think that scared him a little bit because he zoomed into a parking lot.
With no warning, the kidnapper abruptly stops the car and takes off on foot. A few minutes later, a patrol car spots the stolen vehicle.
I was sitting in the back seat of the car when the officer had received the call that they were safe, and I just remember feeling probably like a million bricks taken off my shoulder. I didn't care about anything that other than that they're all in one piece.
The girls are uninjured, but Jocelyn is shaken and terrified that police won't locate the kidnapper.
What if they don't find him? Which was honestly really scary.
Within 25 minutes, Jocelyn and her baby sister are reunited with their parents.
I just grabbed onto her and Ivy and just knew that that was a good moment because that she was still there and nothing happened to her.
It just felt like forever. But as soon as I saw, got close to her and saw, where she was, I couldn't have done any better, preserving her own life plus her sister's. She took hold of the situation, and I'm proud of her.
24 hours later, someone reports a man at a bus station bragging about a carjacking and kidnapping.
The police went down there, and he was wearing the same clothes as he was wearing the day before in all the videos.
It's Jocelyn's kidnapper. He's taken into custody for questioning, but refuses to talk.
How are you?
I'm good. I got something to say.
Okay, no worries. My name's Heather Lynn. What's your name?
Mom said I ain't got to say to you.
But then, after he's read his rights, he suddenly changes his mind.
He was just coming up with all kinds of information, which was perfect for the case. Actually, he was the one that told on himself.
The man's name is Charles Brandon Peterson, and it turns out he's no stranger to the criminal justice system. His long list of convictions includes 16 felonies, such as theft, robbery, and assault.
And so When I saw the violent crimes that he had been convicted of in his past, I knew then right away just how lucky Jocelyn and Ivy were.
Police arresting 39-year-old Charles Peterson this morning.
Peterson is currently behind bars at the Utah State Prison for several parole violations and is still awaiting trial for the case involving Jocelyn and her baby sister.
That definitely makes me feel better, that knowing that he's not still prowling around out there where he belongs, daytime bars.
As for what caused Peterson to steal the car that day, Detective Lorkey can only speculate.
I think that he has a drug habit and he saw it as something to maybe trade in for some drugs. I don't think he had any intention of kidnapping kids.
Whatever his intentions, she's amazed by how then 13-year-old Jocelyn handled the horrifying ordeal.
People that ask, what should you do in a situation like this? Whatever you can do to survive is the right thing to do.
Jocelyn's parents couldn't agree more.
Oh, she handled it amazing. She's so smart and strong for her age.
So she impressed me just by using her instincts. She trusted herself, which was awesome. You know, it's something you can't teach.
As for Jocelyn, who is now 15 years old, she says the terrifying situation taught her something important about herself.
I've learned that I am stronger than I thought I was. I thought I would just sit there crying, scared, not doing anything, but apparently I have it in me to not do that. So I was kind of happy about that.
Coming up, another young woman stands up for herself.
I was like, you don't touch me.
June 30th, 2018. It's a summer evening in Savannah, Georgia, at a popular pizza joint called Vinny Van Gogo's.
So this is a party spot. A lot of people go, they drink, they get a little rowdy.
A security camera records a waitress in the middle of a busy shift.
Her back is turned. She's not really focused on what's going on around her, let alone behind her.
A male customer starts to walk past her.
He looks like a typical patron. Maybe he's going to the bathroom or he's going up to the bar. You really think nothing of it.
But then, the man does something shocking.
This man walks by and just grabs her from the behind.
It all happens so fast.
It's shocking that we're actually seeing this unfold. This is just simply wrong.
Does this man know the waitress? Is he drunk? Why does he think this behavior is okay?
It's a way of feeling more macho, more manly. Just by groping someone, you are basically taking a position of power.
But this waitress isn't about to let him get away with this. She immediately charges after him.
She's like, not today. I'm taking my power back.
She grabs him by the collar, puts him in a headlock, and in one swoop, the 115-pound waitress slams the groper against a wall.
She bends him around and body slams him right down to the ground.
Stunned patrons look on as she tells the man off and then asks someone to call the police.
He thought he was just gonna grab this waitress and keep on walking and nobody would be the wiser. But now he's slammed to the ground, all eyes on him.
Restaurant employees make sure the groper remains on scene until police arrive.
Hey, ma'am. Hey, I'm Officer Wilson. I'm the primary officer.
I was setting the menus down, and he came up behind me and just took a handful.
Okay.
After reviewing the surveillance footage, police arrest the man for sexual battery and place him in handcuffs.
All right, man. Do me a favor. Go ahead and place your hands on your back for me. All right. It's on video. Managers witnessed it. Everyone else, too, okay? So right now, you're going to be placed under arrest, all right?
But the story doesn't end there, because it turns out the man isn't at the restaurant alone.
Who's this lady? I'm not sure who she is. Who are you? Fiance.
Shockingly, before groping the waitress, he had been eating dinner with his fiancée and their 2 children.
He clearly has to be embarrassed. They're gonna know exactly what he did.
Who is this man? Why is he behaving this way in front of his own fiancée? And what is going to happen next?
It gets really complicated really quickly.
A Georgia waitress took matters into her own hands when a man groped her.
When a man inappropriately grabs a waitress in a Savannah restaurant, she swiftly takes him down with a headlock and body slam. The woman the man groped is 21-year-old Amelia Holden. She's been a waitress for 5 years and is just finishing up a long shift when the shocking ordeal unfolds.
I was actually talking to my coworker about how I was ready to go home, and then I got another table, I took an order, and that's when the incident happened. I was putting the menus away and I felt someone grab my butt, and my initial thought was, this has to be one of my coworkers.
But when Amelia turns around and realizes it's a total stranger, she isn't having it.
And that's when I just kind of reacted.
Then, things happen in a lightning-fast blur as she throws the man against the wall.
Just kind of felt like an out-of-body experience. I've never done anything like that. I've never had any sort of defense training. I guess it was just all instinct.
While the defeated man sinks to the floor in a daze, Amelia caps off her astonishing maneuvers with a message.
I kind of leaned over and was like, "You don't touch me."
Amelia says the reason she reacted so strongly is because she got fed up with how often male customers were harassing her and her female coworkers.
There have been so many times where we've been verbally harassed, physically harassed.
Sometimes people go to these bars and they view waitresses and servers as being like objects that are there to entertain them, to degrade. And so, I'm not surprised that some of the servers were feeling like, hey, this has got to stop.
Restaurant employees are often told by law enforcement that there is little they can do.
Normally in crimes like this, they're not videotaped. And if they are videotaped, that perpetrator's in the wind. And it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
But Amelia's manager had decided to install security cameras around the restaurant only a few weeks before she was assaulted. The man caught on camera turns out to be 31-year-old Ryan Cherwinski, a grocery store worker visiting from Florida. He's arrested for sexual battery and then tries to blame Amelia for his behavior.
It wasn't intentional. I was just trying to walk down the aisle and she was in the way. I understand she gets a lot of customers. I'm not.
You can explain that when you get your court date, all right?
His initial reaction was that he didn't do anything, and then it kind of turned into, well, I didn't mean to. It was never like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have done that.
Next, he shifts gears from aggressive to pitiful.
Hey man, everything's gonna be all right.
It's not.
He even pleads with the officer to let him speak with Amelia.
Can you bring her out here?
Who?
The lady that I've apparently offended?
No, she doesn't want to see you, man.
Can I apologize to her?
You can explain that when you get your court date, all right?
Surprisingly, Cherwinski's fiance, who was eating dinner with him at the restaurant, tries to defend him.
Can we pull the whole video?
I understand that you're upset. I'm paying attention, but this is what we have to do. No. At this point, she's a victim.
And soon, Cherwinski is taken away from the scene.
Transporting one white male from Benny Van Gogo's. Obviously, he's going to jail, so that's felony, so. All right.
And in August of 2018, the father of two is sentenced to 11 months probation and banned from returning to Savannah's Chatham County.
The fact that he was arrested for this sends a clear message that this type of behavior will not be tolerated.
Still, Amelia is relieved that the dad doesn't get a tougher sentence.
When I found out that he is a father of 2 children, I was a little relieved his sentencing wasn't as harsh as it could have been.
Meanwhile, the video of Amelia body slamming her groper quickly goes viral, racking up over 4 million views.
I had people from the UK messaging me, people from Hungary.
And even attracts the attention of late-night TV hosts.
She grabbed that man and threw him to the ground. Check this out. She didn't even drop her notepad. This woman is an amazing server.
Still, not all of the reaction is positive.
Now being waitress shamed by social media trolls because she was wearing short shorts and a crop top.
But Amelia is quick to clap back.
Where I work, it's like 100 degrees there. I mean, it's Savannah, Georgia in the middle of the summer.
And Amelia hopes that people will see the bigger picture, and her actions will bring lasting change.
I've had so many people contact me telling me that them seeing that video kind of gave them the power to press charges against their attackers. That really made me feel good about what I did.
A young couple comes face to face with death when a man bursts into their home with a shotgun.
It's unbelievable. You're already in your house. There's no way you can run.
But this burglar gets more than he ever expected.
This guy reacts super quickly. He is in full-on fight mode.
This is a knockdown, drag-out brawl. It's a fight for survival.
And this fight is just the beginning.
In all my years in law enforcement, I have never seen anyone try to do this.
That was beyond me, beyond anything I could even imagine would ever happen.
And then, a quiet afternoon lunch is shattered by a senseless, violent rampage.
You see him repeatedly strike Jacqueline in the head and face. And that's some of the hardest film to watch because you can see the terror in her eyes.
It's 1:30 in the morning on February 17th, 2019. A young woman puts her feet up in her quiet home in Idaho Falls when the unthinkable becomes reality.
This is incredibly scary. It's late in the night. The homeowner is relaxing on the couch on her phone when all of a sudden, some intruder is walking up her stairs armed with a shotgun.
You're not expecting this. You feel safe. You're getting ready probably for bed. And the next thing you know, there's a guy with a shotgun pointing it in your face.
The woman doesn't move, kind of like the deer frozen in headlights. It's unbelievable. You're already in your house. There's no way you can run.
But as the woman shrinks from the shotgun-wielding assailant, her fiancé emerges from the kitchen and springs into action.
This guy reacts super quickly. He sees this guy with the shotgun and he just tries to grab the shotgun from him. He is in full-on fight mode.
As the woman cowers next to the couch, frozen in terror, things become even more terrifying.
This is a knockdown, drag-out brawl. It's a fight for survival at this point. We see the fiancé fall to the ground. He still doesn't let go of the shotgun. Then we see the gunman drag the fiancé literally down the stairs. If he lets go of this shotgun, he can get shot. His fiancé can get shot. So he has to hold on for dear life. Otherwise, it could mean certain death.
As they disappear down the stairs, the young woman, 18-year-old Isabel Allen, jumps up, runs to the bedroom and calls the police, while her fiancé, 21-year-old Cash Shamel, fights desperately for control of the gun.
As he's dragging me down the stairs by the shotgun, I just held on for dear life. I'm very surprised myself he didn't shoot me.
This terrifying assault begins when Cash and Isabel are at their most vulnerable.
We'd actually just gotten back from a date. We did one of those escape rooms. We're feeling pretty good about the night. I was just making a drink, getting ready to relax for the evening, and she was watching a crime documentary, just kind of idly scrolling through social media.
Cash, an aspiring musician, and Isabel, a cosmetology student, got engaged just a few days earlier. And as the happy young couple begin to wind down for the night, their 4 housemates are already asleep in the back bedrooms.
So there was 6 people in the house at the time. The door swung open, and I didn't think anything of it until he got up the stairs with the shotgun.
Caught off guard in his own home, Cash has only a split second to react.
Your brain is just pure adrenaline, and you don't have a whole lot of time to make these decisions. And I take on this 225-pound guy So I kind of sized him up with my eyes, and there was beads of sweat on his forehead. There was attention to him. And then he started telling me, sit down. And I saw that I could get that barrel out of the line of fire and out of my way and her way to get it towards the ceiling. So that's what I did. Once I grabbed the barrel of the shotgun, he instinctively reacted and tried to pull it backwards. It's my strength versus his strength with his shotgun.
We hear the cursing and the screaming going back and forth. It's like this perpetrator is actually offended that this homeowner is putting up a fight and won't allow himself to be robbed.
As they wrestle for control, Cash screams out to his housemates for help.
Something good! Now!
I have an AR-15 and a Glock. So as soon as we're on the ground, I start yelling for my roommate, Dustin, guns, Dustin, guns. And he picks up the shotgun and he starts dragging us down towards the stairs.
Who is this masked assailant? Why did he target this home? And how is this going to end? After a shotgun-wielding thug bursts into his home late at night, Cash Shamel takes daring action and finds himself in a desperate fight for survival.
This assailant seemed to have everything planned out. He makes his movements deliberate up the stairs, and he knows how to hold that shotgun.
He was finger on the trigger, ready to go, making demands and thinking he was in charge. But I made a conscious decision to not just roll over and become a victim. I was fully ready to take a shotgun shell to the chest if that's what it meant.
The knockdown, drag-out brawl leads to a tumble down the stairs, where fortune turns the struggle in Cash's favor.
He slips, and he falls pretty hard. I grabbed his shotgun, hit him with the butt in the face as many times as I could. My roommates finally show up, and they don't know what's going on at all. And eventually, he decided, all right, I'm sick of this. I'm gonna leave now. And he's scrambling out the door.
The burglar seems to flee into the night, but in a shocking twist, just a few moments later, he turns around and retraces his steps.
He circled back around my yard and walked back to the front door. I could not honestly believe the guts of him.
The cops are on their way, but Cash's adrenaline is still pumping, and he's prepared to defend his home.
I've been in a stick-up type situation before, and after that, I made a decision never to let that happen again. And Idaho actually eliminated the need for a concealed carry permit, so I have carried a long gun since I was 18. I've been a pistol since I turned 21. So when he came back, he was still trying to be physically aggressive. And you see it in the video, he's standing there with the AR-15 and the pistol at the top of the stairs for a while. My roommates are then at the base of the stairs, keeping him there. And we're having a conversation with this guy. He's trying to make a deal with us to get his shotgun back.
In all my years in law enforcement, I have never seen anyone try to do this.
Determined to retrieve his shotgun, the perpetrator makes an outrageous threat.
The tables turned completely. Now you have this intruder threatening to call the police on the guy who lives in the home that he's defending.
I'm calling the police on you now. I'm calling the police on you, Joe.
He's talking about making a deal and a trade.
Make a deal? What's the deal? You guys leave me up and back and I'll shoot you at the head? Yeah. How I still want
That was beyond me, beyond anything I could even imagine would ever happen.
Call me to my home!
Yeah, it definitely set me up, and I just couldn't deal with it anymore, so I just walked down the stairs, and that's when I pistol whipped him.
You understand?
Just as Cash is about to get carried away by his rage, one of his roommates steps in.
My other roommate freaks out, the one that's blonde and comes up the stairs. He helps to push the guy out the door, and we can see as we're pushing him out the door, blue and red and white lights all coming around the corner. And so I showed them the footage immediately. They were like, "Did you kill him?" I was like, "No, he's alive, he left." They said, "Okay, good."
Police are soon hot on the heels of this still armed would-be burglar. They quickly locate the assailant in his car just a few blocks away, passed out from the beating he received at Cash's hands. In his possession are drugs, firearms, and a manifesto detailing the rules and hierarchy of a gang.
During this time, I'm finally starting to come down off the adrenaline high, so I'm shaking. There's a little bit of nausea, and then an overwhelming sense of just frustration.
One question hangs over the dark winter night. Why target Cash and Isabel?
In the aftermath, I kind of learned that he was coming over to settle some kind of a debt. They're looking around for money and drugs, but he obviously had no idea about who really lived in the house.
The suspect is identified as 28-year-old Eddie Walker. He's charged and convicted for felony aggravated battery and sentenced to 14 years in prison.
Cash's actions, although desperate, are heroic. He has the absolute right to defend himself in his own home.
But for Cash and Isabel, the ordeal has left a lasting mark.
It affected her deeply for a while, but we got through it together. We got married in October, and we're doing great. Looking back on it now, I really feel like I maybe would have wanted to react a little less aggressively, but the biggest thing for me was the dude's not dead, we're not dead, nobody died, like, thank God no one is dead.
Coming up, two elderly women find themselves on the defensive when a man goes berserk.
I saw a hand reaching for the carafe, and the next thing I knew, there was an excruciating pain on the back side of my head.
September 29th, 2019, 4:25 p.m. A pair of elderly women sit down at a restaurant in Phoenix, Arizona. Then, their quiet afternoon is suddenly shattered by brutal violence.
Starts off tranquil and peaceful. Two women sitting at a table, drinking coffee. A strange man walks up to the table, and then all of a sudden, we're just immersed in violent behavior.
He grabs the coffee carafe and begins to mercilessly beat this elderly woman repeatedly.
The attack is shockingly savage and seems to come out of nowhere.
This didn't appear to be a man on the verge of violence. He just happened to be walking by. Maybe he was going to his table or going to the restroom.
There's no indication that this man knows this woman. This seems completely random and out of control.
As one woman tries to get away and the man chases after her, other diners flee.
They get out of there, which is incredibly smart, because if someone tries to intervene, it could make this person even angrier. We don't know if he's armed, if he's high on drugs. We just have no idea.
And with the restaurant emptied out, the two elderly women, 69-year-old Jane Tyre-Tyrones and her friend, 73-year-old Jacqueline, who was so violently beaten, are left to fend for themselves. For these two old friends, this was supposed to be a relaxing day out on the town.
Jackie and I go to the casino every Sunday because you get a $20 gas card and free play. So we go to the casino, and then afterwards we stop and get something to eat.
This was a regular weekly tradition for these two women. They're both elderly, tired, and that was one of their favorite pastimes.
Both Jackie and I like pancakes, and it was right on our way. At first, there was absolutely nothing unusual. They seated us at the first table by the door, and I noticed that there was one table across from us with a couple and some kids, and that was the only other people that I saw. We were probably there maybe 15 minutes. We hadn't even actually placed our order yet. I was on my phone, and I saw a hand reaching for the carafe, and I didn't look up because I assumed that it was our waiter. And the next thing I knew, There was an excruciating pain on the back side of my head. I went down and hit the table, split my chin open, and don't remember anything for a few seconds.
Jane blacks out as the crazed assailant continues his rampage. But why has he attacked them? And what is he going to do to her friend?
Phoenix 911, where is your emergency? The customer just came in and started attacking some other customers, and there's blood involved.
After an unprovoked assault, Jane Tyre-Tyrones momentarily loses consciousness after being struck on the head. And the assailant immediately pounces on her companion, Jacqueline.
You see him repeatedly strike Jacqueline in the head and face. And that's some of the hardest film to watch because you can see the terror in her eyes. Jacqueline quickly gets into a defensive position, starts trying to protect herself, and he's just repeatedly pounding on her.
Jane comes to only seconds later and scrambles for safety.
The only thing I could think of was getting out of the booth and getting away so that I didn't get hit again. I saw one of the employees, so I got behind him and he took me to the back, through the kitchen and into a security room where all the monitors for the video cameras were. And all the employees was in the back room. They were all really young and they didn't really know for sure what to do. So I made sure that somebody had called the police.
Meanwhile, Jacqueline is left alone in the dining room with their attacker when the fight takes a surprising turn.
He's grabbing other coffee canisters, he's grabbing other plates. He starts throwing them at her, and she's throwing things at him in an attempt to get him to leave.
Hiding in a storage room, Jane watches in horror on the security monitors. Is her friend going to survive this brutal attack?
When I saw that Jackie was throwing the dishes back at the assailant, it certainly didn't surprise me. She's always pretty much been pretty feisty, but I could see she had a cut above her eye and there was blood coming down the side of her face.
But Jacqueline isn't giving up. As her attacker continues to chase her, she makes a desperate run for the back hallway.
She goes back to the bathroom and is trying to find other people to get help.
Now alone in the dining area, the once violent man seems to pull himself together and turns his attention to committing other crimes.
He starts actually picking up things, and he grabs someone's bag that they left behind.
He grabs some of the family's belongings, and then he goes to the two elderly women's booth, grabs some of their belongings. I believe he actually took one of their cell phones.
With her assailant distracted, Jacqueline takes the opportunity to run out the front door as the crazed man makes his way into the kitchen, where things get even scarier.
He picks up a pot and he burns his hand, and then he moves to place a rag on an open flame, starting a fire.
This person is out of control and just in destroy mode. Everything about this is erratic and illogical.
He went from attacking a woman to stealing property to starting a fire. It's all just crazy at this point.
The strange man seems to be lashing out in every way he can. But why? All the while, Jane and the employees are trapped in the security room, praying that he won't find them or that the restaurant won't burn down.
I was back there probably 10 to 15 minutes, and it seemed like we were in there forever. I just felt helpless.
When the police arrive moments later, they see a male in a red shirt exit the building through an emergency door and sprint across the parking lot. He fits the description they've been given by an employee who called 911.
It's a white guy wearing a red shirt with black pants.
And he's quickly taken into custody. Inside the restaurant, employees quickly extinguish the fire, and at last, the rampage is over.
We didn't get let out of the room until the police got there. And when I got outside, they had him sitting down with his hands cuffed behind his back.
He's identified as 47-year-old Joe Meza, a homeless veteran who has struggled with mental illness and has had many run-ins with the law before.
We do know that there are higher rates of PTSD and mood disorders and sometimes substance use with veterans, but people who have PTSD, they're not typically violent like this.
The criminal justice system isn't really set up for mental health issues, so we end up in this circle all the time because even though they have mental issues, they're still committing crimes. We have actual victims, and these victims demand justice.
Jane and Jacqueline both sustained serious injuries from the terrifying ordeal.
I drove us to the hospital. They didn't have an ambulance. By the time we got to the hospital, her eye was already almost swollen shut and black and blue. The cut on my chin took 5 stitches to close, and the cut above her eye took 3 stitches.
But the psychological scars may never heal.
It's made me much more cautious. I won't sit at the table by the door, and I don't like it when people are behind me because I always get the feeling I'm going to be blindsided again, and that scares me. But I think it's worse for Jackie because I do believe that she has nightmares from being face to face with him.
Meza is charged with 2 counts of aggravated assault, theft, and disorderly conduct, and is currently awaiting trial.
They want justice to be served, and if he does have issues, for him to get help and get those issues resolved. I think knowing why it maybe happened could give them some measure of closure.
On the afternoon of February 1st, 2022, nothing about the streets of Gromo Navano suggested that the town was about to become the center of one of Italy's most heartbreaking criminal cases. It was an ordinary day in this community in the province of Naples, where daily routines unfolded quietly and neighbors often recognized one another by name. People returned home from work, businesses prepared for the evening, and families expected another peaceful night. Among them was 23-year-old Rosa Alfieri, a young woman whose life reflected the simplicity and stability of the place she called home. She had finished her workday at the tobacco shop where she worked and began the familiar journey back to the apartment building owned by her family. It was a route she had taken countless times before, one that required no caution beyond the ordinary awareness of everyday life. There is no reason for Rosa to believe that this afternoon would be any different from the hundreds that had come before it. Yet within minutes of arriving home, she disappeared behind the door of an apartment inside the very building where she had grown up. The place that had always represented safety suddenly became the scene of unimaginable violence. The tragedy that unfolded that afternoon would leave an entire town in mourning and raise painful questions throughout Italy about trust, vulnerability, and violence against women. The most disturbing aspect of the case was not only the brutality of the crime itself, but the identity of the man responsible. According to investigators, the person who lured Rosa into danger was not a stranger wandering through the neighborhood or an unknown criminal waiting in the shadows. He was the family's own tenant, a man who had rented a ground-floor apartment in the building only about 2 weeks earlier. His presence had quickly become part of the ordinary landscape of daily life. He lived under the same roof, shared the same courtyard, and crossed paths with the family as any tenant might. There was nothing to suggest that this recent arrival would soon be accused of committing one of the most shocking murders the community had ever experienced. The investigation would later reveal that what happened inside his apartment lasted only a short period of time. Yet every minute would become the subject of painstaking forensic reconstruction and courtroom examination. Prosecutors concluded that Rosa had been persuaded to enter the apartment after the tenant invented a reason to bring her inside. Once the door closed, investigators believe that he attempted to sexually assault her. The evidence found later inside the apartment painted a picture not of surrender, but of resistance. Objects had been moved during a violent struggle, Signs throughout the room indicated that Rosa fought desperately to defend herself. According to the findings presented during the investigation, her determination to resist ultimately led to her death. The medical examination established that she died from mechanical asphyxia after being strangled. Investigators concluded that her attacker first used his hands before using a pillowcase to tighten around her neck. Her body was later dragged into the bathroom, where it remained until her father, worried that his daughter had not returned as expected, began searching for her. His search ended with a discovery that no parent should ever have to make. The scene inside the apartment devastated not only Rosa's family, but an entire community that had known her as a quiet, hardworking young woman with her whole future ahead of her. While her family searched desperately for answers, the suspect had already left the building. According to investigators, he changed his clothes, boarded a train, traveled toward Naples, bought a scratch ticket, took a taxi, purchased drugs, and later sought medical treatment at San Paolo Hospital after becoming ill. It was there that 2 police officers recognized him from photographs that had already been distributed following the discovery of Rosa's body. His arrest came quickly, but understanding exactly what had happened inside that apartment would require months of forensic work, witness interviews, psychiatric evaluations, and legal proceedings. During questioning, the suspect admitted killing Rosa, but repeatedly altered his explanations. At different stages, he claimed that drugs had affected his behavior, that he heard voices telling him to kill, and that he could not remember everything that had happened. Psychiatric experts later concluded that despite his drug use, he remained fully capable of understanding and controlling his actions at the time of the crime. Those conclusions would become significant during the trial, where attempts to reduce his criminal responsibility were ultimately rejected. Yet even after the arrest, one important question remained at the center of public discussion. Early reports caused many to believe that Rosa had been raped before being killed. However, the autopsy did not establish that a completed sexual assault had occurred. Instead, prosecutors argued that the available evidence demonstrated an attempted sexual assault and that Rosa lost her life while resisting that attack. That distinction did nothing to lessen the horror experienced by her family or the outrage felt across Italy. If anything, it highlighted Rosa's determination to defend herself until the very end. Her courage became one of the defining aspects of the case, remembered not through speculation or embellishment, but through the physical evidence that documented the struggle inside the apartment. As the investigation progressed and the case entered the courtroom, every piece of evidence was examined in detail. Investigators reconstructed the final movements of both Rosa and the man accused of killing her. Forensic specialists analyzed fingerprints, biological traces, DNA evidence, and the condition of the crime scene. Prosecutors argued that the sequence of evidence formed a coherent account of deliberate violence committed against a young woman who had simply returned home after work. The courts would eventually agree, sentencing Elpidio Dambra to life imprisonment on April 12, 2023, a sentence later upheld on appeal in December of the same year. But before there were courtrooms, verdicts, or legal arguments, there was Rosa Alfieri herself. Before her name appeared in headlines across Italy, she was known simply as a daughter, a colleague, a girlfriend, a neighbor, and a familiar face in the streets of Grumo Navano. To understand why her death resonated so deeply throughout the country, it is necessary to begin not with the crime itself, but with the life that was taken, the ordinary routines that defined her days, and the quiet world that existed before everything changed forever. Before Rosa Alfieri's name appeared in newspaper headlines across Italy, before investigators began reconstructing the final minutes of her life, and before courtrooms examined every piece of forensic evidence, she was simply a young woman building an ordinary future. At just 23 years old, Rosa represented the kind of life that often goes unnoticed because it was defined not by extraordinary events, but by consistency, kindness, and quiet determination. Friends, relatives, and people who knew her described her as polite, hardworking, and reserved. She did not seek attention, nor was she known for conflict or controversy. Instead, she lived the type of life that countless young adults dream of: steady employment, close family relationships, and hopes for the years ahead. It is often these ordinary lives that make tragedies like hers especially devastating, because they remind us how suddenly normality can disappear. Rosa lived in Grumo Navano, a municipality in the metropolitan city of Naples. Like many communities in southern Italy, Grumo Navano was built around strong family connections and neighborhoods where familiarity shaped everyday interactions. Streets were filled with people who had known one another for years. Businesses relied on loyal customers, and apartment buildings frequently housed multiple generations of the same family. Trust was woven into daily life. Residents greeted familiar faces, exchanged conversations in courtyards, and rarely imagined that danger might come from someone living only a few steps away. It was within this environment that Rosa had grown up. The apartment building where she lived belonged to her family, serving not only as their home, but also as a property where some units were rented to tenants. It was a place filled with memories accumulated over many years, a place associated with safety rather than fear. Rosa's daily routine reflected the rhythm of this peaceful community. She worked at a tobacco shop owned by her boyfriend, contributing to the small business while building a stable life for herself. Working in a neighborhood shop meant interacting with familiar customers every day. Such businesses often become social centers where conversations are exchanged alongside purchases, and employees become recognizable faces within the community. Rosa's work required responsibility, reliability, and patience. Those qualities appeared consistently in the descriptions offered by those who knew her. She was regarded as dependable, someone who approached her responsibilities seriously without seeking recognition for doing so. Her relationship with her boyfriend also suggested a future grounded in stability rather than uncertainty. The couple had plans like many young adults, imagining the years ahead with optimism instead of fear. Nothing in the available information suggested that Rosa lived a dangerous lifestyle or found herself surrounded by violence. Her world consisted largely of work, home, family, and the people closest to her. She represented the image of an ordinary young woman living an ordinary life. That ordinary life would later become one of the reasons why Italy reacted so strongly to her death. The contrast between the simplicity of her everyday existence and the brutality of the crime made the case particularly difficult for many people to comprehend. Every morning likely followed a familiar rhythm. Rosa would leave the family apartment, travel to work, spend the day assisting customers, and eventually return home. The route back to her apartment building had become almost automatic through repetition. There was no reason to fear entering the courtyard where she had spent years of her life. There was no reason to question whether someone living in the same building might represent a threat. Home is generally understood as the safest place a person can return to after work, a place where caution gives way to comfort. That assumption shaped Rosa's final afternoon. She arrived home not expecting danger, but expecting another ordinary evening with her family. The building itself occupied a central place in the events that investigators would later reconstruct. Unlike a large apartment complex filled with strangers, this was a family-owned property where the Alfieri family lived alongside tenants renting individual apartments. Such arrangements are common throughout Italy, where family-owned buildings often include rental units that provide additional income. Landlords and tenants may occasionally cross paths while entering or leaving the building, exchanging greetings in shared courtyards or stairwells without developing close personal relationships. That appears to have been the nature of Rosa's interactions with the building's newest tenant. There was no indication that she had established any meaningful connection with him before February 1st, 2022. Their acquaintance was limited simply because he had moved into the building only a short time earlier. Nevertheless, the shared residence created an atmosphere of assumed familiarity. Seeing someone in the building did not automatically raise suspicion because residents naturally expected tenants to come and go throughout the day. This sense of normalcy would later become one of the prosecution's most significant observations. According to investigators, Rosa did not willingly place herself in danger because she believed she was entering the apartment of someone who lived under the same roof as her family. That difference mattered enormously. The prosecution argued that the trust associated with the shared building allowed the suspect to persuade Rosa to enter his apartment after inventing a reason to do so. Had he been a stranger approaching her on the street, investigators suggested, the encounter might have unfolded very differently. Instead, the environment itself lowered any sense of immediate danger. The building that symbolized security inadvertently became the setting that made the crime possible. Rosa's family could never have imagined that renting one apartment to a new tenant would ultimately place their daughter in mortal danger. For them, the building represented decades of ordinary family life. Children grow up in such places. Birthdays are celebrated. Holidays are shared. Parents watch sons and daughters become adults. Every hallway, staircase, and doorway carries personal memories accumulated over years. When tragedy struck within those familiar walls, it permanently transformed the meaning of the place. A home that had once embodied protection became inseparable from unbearable loss. The emotional impact of that transformation extended beyond the immediate family. Many residents of Grumo Navano recognized their own lives in Rosa's circumstances. They too lived in neighborhoods where people trusted those around them. They too believed that returning home marked the end of daily worries rather than the beginning of unimaginable danger. This sense of shared vulnerability contributed significantly to the public response that followed. As details of the investigation emerged, people across Italy struggled with one unsettling realization. Rosa had done nothing extraordinary on the day she died. She had simply finished work and returned home. It was an action repeated every day by millions of people. That universality made her story impossible to dismiss as something distant or unlikely. She became a symbol of how ordinary routines can be shattered by acts of violence that no reasonable person could have anticipated. Yet understanding how such an unimaginable crime became possible requires examining another figure, who entered this quiet community only weeks before the murder. His arrival attracted little attention at first. He appeared to be nothing more than a new tenant renting a ground-floor apartment in the Alfieri family's building. Few people could have imagined that within approximately 2 weeks of moving in, he would become the central figure in one of Italy's most shocking criminal investigations. The story of Rosa Alfieri cannot be understood without understanding who Elpidio D'Ambro was, where he came from, and how his brief presence inside that building would forever change the lives of everyone connected to it. The events of February 1st, 2022, cannot be understood without examining the man who had entered the Alfieri family's building only a short time before the murder. Unlike Rosa, whose life had been rooted in Grumo Navano for years, Elpidio D'Ambro was a recent arrival. To the residents of the building, he was simply the newest tenant occupying the ground-floor apartment. He had been living there for only about 2 weeks, an amount of time too brief for meaningful relationships to develop and too short for most people to form a complete impression of his character. In many communities, a new tenant attracts little attention. People may exchange polite greetings in the hallway, nod to one another in the courtyard, or occasionally cross paths while entering and leaving the building. Such interactions are often superficial, built on shared space rather than genuine familiarity. That was the situation inside the Alfieri family's building. Dambrow's presence was recent enough that he remained, in many ways, an unknown figure. Yet despite the limited acquaintance, his status as a tenant carried an unspoken assumption of normalcy. He lived in the same building, paid rent, and became part of the ordinary rhythm of daily life. Nothing about those first 2 weeks publicly suggested that he would soon become the subject of one of Italy's most shocking homicide investigations. Investigators would later learn far more about Dambrow's past than the Alfieri family had known when he rented the apartment. At the time of the murder, he was 31 years old. According to information presented during the investigation, he had previously lived in Spain and had separated from his wife. Authorities also examined aspects of his background that included drug-related issues and a history involving domestic violence. These details became important during the criminal proceedings because they offered investigators additional context regarding the man accused of killing Rosa. However, there is no indication that the Alfieri family possessed complete knowledge of these aspects of his past when he moved into their building. Like many landlords renting an apartment, they saw him primarily as a tenant rather than as someone who would eventually become a danger to their household. This distinction would later become central to the emotional impact of the case. Families who rent apartments generally assume that the people sharing their property intend only to live ordinary lives. They do not expect that one of those tenants will become responsible for a violent crime committed inside the building itself. During the weeks before February 1st, Dambrow's relationship with Rosa appears to have been minimal. There is no evidence suggesting a close friendship, frequent conversations, or any significant personal connection. They occupied the same physical space simply because one lived in the family's apartment while the other rented a unit within the same building. In retrospect, that limited familiarity would prove deeply significant. Prosecutors argued that Dambrow's status as a tenant enabled him to approach Rosa without immediately causing alarm. He was not an unfamiliar face appearing unexpectedly in the neighborhood. He belonged, at least superficially, to the environment that Rosa associated with home. This subtle distinction may have reduced any instinctive sense of danger when she encountered him on the afternoon of February 1st. Investigators later concluded that he used this familiarity to persuade Rosa to enter his apartment, after inventing a reason for her to come inside. Exactly what explanation he offered has not become the defining element of the case. Rather, the importance lies in the fact that prosecutors believe the explanation was sufficient to convince Rosa that entering the apartment posed no immediate risk. Such trust is not unusual among neighbors or tenants who share a residential building. Everyday life frequently depends upon countless small acts of confidence. A neighbor may ask for assistance carrying groceries, request help moving furniture, or seek a brief conversation about a household matter. Most people respond without imagining that an ordinary request could conceal criminal intentions. Investigators argued that Dambrow exploited precisely this expectation of normal social behavior. His apartment occupied the ground floor, making access quick and convenient. Rosa likely viewed entering briefly as nothing more than another routine interaction connected to someone who lived under the same roof as her family. According to prosecutors, that ordinary moment became the opportunity through which the crime began. Looking back after the investigation concluded, the timeline surrounding Dambrow's arrival appears unsettling in its brevity. Only approximately 2 weeks separated his move into the building from Rosa's death. For the Alfieri family, there had been little opportunity to understand the new tenant's personality or observe behavior that might have raised concerns. Relationships between landlords and tenants often remain distant, particularly during the early weeks of a tenancy. Rent is paid, greetings are exchanged, and each person continues with daily responsibilities. There is generally no expectation that landlords investigate every aspect of a tenant's personal history beyond what is required for the rental agreement. Yet once the murder became public, many people naturally questioned how someone accused of such a brutal crime had come to live inside the family's own building. Those questions reflected understandable grief and shock rather than evidence of wrongdoing by the family. Nothing presented during the investigation suggested that Rosa or her relatives knowingly placed themselves in danger. Instead, the case illustrated how violence can emerge from circumstances that appear completely ordinary until viewed through the lens of hindsight. As investigators reconstructed Dambrieux's background, attention also turned toward his personal circumstances before the murder. His separation from his wife, previous residence in Spain, reported history involving drugs, and allegations of domestic violence all became subjects of legal examination. During the trial, however, the central focus remained the evidence connected directly to Rosa's death rather than speculation about unrelated aspects of his past. Prosecutors relied heavily on forensic findings, witness testimony, physical evidence, and Dambrieux's own statements to establish what occurred inside the apartment. The defense, meanwhile, would later emphasize his drug use and mental condition in an effort to argue for reduced criminal responsibility. Those legal arguments belonged to the future. On February 1st itself, none of those courtroom debates had yet begun. At that moment, Dambrieux was simply a tenant whose actions during a brief encounter would irrevocably alter countless lives. The ordinary appearance of his daily existence made the crime even more difficult for the public to comprehend. There had been no lengthy feud between him and Rosa, no well-documented pattern of conflict within the building, and no public indication that violence was imminent. Instead, investigators described a sequence of events that escalated rapidly after Rosa entered the apartment. That sudden transition from routine interaction to deadly violence became one of the most disturbing features of the entire case. It challenged assumptions about safety within familiar environments and demonstrated how quickly trust can be manipulated by someone with criminal intent. As prosecutors continued piecing together the evidence, one conclusion gradually became clear. The murder was not the result of a chance confrontation or spontaneous argument in a public place. According to their reconstruction, the events unfolded inside Dambrieux's apartment after he intentionally brought Rosa there under false pretenses. The apartment that had seemed like nothing more than another rented unit within the family building would soon become one of the most meticulously examined crime scenes in Italy. Every object inside, every biological trace, every fingerprint, and every sign of struggle would contribute to understanding what happened behind the closed door on that quiet February afternoon. The next stage of the story would reveal, minute by minute, how investigators believed those final moments unfolded and how Rosa fought with extraordinary determination in a desperate attempt to survive. February 1st, 2022 began like countless other winter days in Grumo Navano. There was nothing extraordinary about the weather, the streets, or the routines of the people moving through the town. Businesses opened as usual, residents went to work, and families carried on with the ordinary rhythm of everyday life. For 23-year-old Rosa Alfieri, the day appeared destined to end just as peacefully as it had begun. She spent the day working at her boyfriend's tobacco shop, serving customers and completing the familiar responsibilities that had become part of her daily routine. Nothing suggested that this ordinary afternoon would become the final chapter of her life. When her workday ended, Rosa left the shop and headed home. The journey required no special precautions because she was returning to the place where she had always felt safest. Home represented security, family, and normality. The apartment building belonged to her family, and every entrance, hallway, and staircase was familiar to her. She had walked through that courtyard countless times over the years without fear or hesitation. According to investigators, after Rosa entered the building, she encountered Elpidio Dambra, the 31-year-old tenant who had moved into the ground floor apartment approximately 2 weeks earlier. It was an encounter that, on its surface, would not necessarily have appeared unusual. Neighbors and tenants frequently cross paths inside residential buildings, exchanging greetings or brief conversations before continuing with their day. Prosecutors later argued that Dambra deliberately used this ordinary setting to create an opportunity for the crime. According to the prosecution's reconstruction, he invented a reason to persuade Rosa to enter his apartment. The exact explanation he offered was less important than the effect it achieved. Rosa apparently believed there was no immediate danger in stepping inside the apartment of someone who lived in the same building as her family. It was a decision made within an environment built upon everyday trust rather than suspicion. She had no reason to anticipate what investigators believe was already beginning to unfold behind the apartment door. Once Rosa entered the apartment, prosecutors concluded that the situation changed almost immediately. The door closed, separating the ordinary sounds of the courtyard from the violence that investigators would later reconstruct inside the small residence. According to the prosecution, Dambra intended to sexually assault Rosa. What followed was not a silent or passive encounter, but a desperate struggle for survival. The crime scene itself became one of the most important witnesses in the case. Long after both Rosa and her attacker had left the apartment, forensic specialists carefully examined every room, documenting each detail that could help explain the sequence of events. Their work revealed signs consistent with a violent confrontation rather than an accidental death or a brief altercation. Objects inside the apartment had been displaced. Furniture and belongings no longer appeared in their ordinary positions. The disorder was significant because investigators interpreted it as evidence that Rosa fought intensely against her attacker. Every disturbed object became part of a larger reconstruction. Instead of viewing the apartment as a single static crime scene, forensic experts treated it as a timeline preserved through physical evidence. Each mark, each movement, and each biological trace helped them determine how the struggle unfolded from one moment to the next. Prosecutors argued that Rosa resisted every attempt to overpower her. Rather than surrendering, she fought to escape. The evidence suggested that the confrontation moved through different areas of the apartment as she struggled against the attack. Although no reconstruction can perfectly recreate every second of such a traumatic event, investigators concluded that Rosa's resistance was both immediate and determined. Her efforts to defend herself became one of the defining features of the case. The prosecution maintained that it was precisely because she resisted the attempted sexual assault that the violence escalated to murder. As the struggle continued, investigators concluded that Dambra resorted to increasingly lethal force. According to forensic findings presented during the investigation, Rosa was manually strangled. Medical experts later determined that compression of the neck played a central role in causing her death. However, the violence did not end there. Investigators also concluded that a pillowcase was used around Rosa's neck during the attack. This detail emerged from the forensic examination and became an important component of the prosecution's reconstruction. Rather than describing a sudden or impulsive act lasting only a few seconds, the evidence suggested a sustained assault during which Rosa continued fighting for her life. The medical examination ultimately established that the cause of death was mechanical asphyxia. This conclusion reflected careful analysis, by forensic specialists who examined the injuries and evidence collected during the autopsy. Their findings became one of the strongest scientific foundations supporting the prosecution's case, because they explained not only how Rosa died, but also supported the broader reconstruction of the struggle that had taken place inside the apartment. Every medical conclusion was considered alongside the physical evidence recovered from the scene, allowing investigators to assemble a coherent sequence of events based on objective findings rather than speculation. After Rosa had been killed, investigators believed Dambra attempted to conceal the immediate appearance of the crime scene. According to the reconstruction presented during the legal proceedings, Rosa's body was dragged into the bathroom. The movement of the body became another significant element examined by forensic experts, who analyzed the physical evidence left behind during this final stage of the attack. The bathroom, ordinarily one of the most private rooms in any home, became the place where Rosa's father would later discover his daughter. The horror of that discovery would permanently mark the family. While the apartment remained silent, the people outside had no immediate awareness that anything extraordinary had occurred. From the courtyard or neighboring apartments, there may have been little to indicate that a violent struggle had taken place only moments earlier. This contrast between the apparent normality outside and the brutality inside became one of the most unsettling aspects of the entire case. Life in the neighborhood continued, unaware that one of its residents had already been murdered within the walls of a familiar family building. Investigators later emphasized that the attack unfolded rapidly after Rosa entered the apartment. There was no evidence of a prolonged relationship between Rosa and Dambra leading to that moment. No history of personal conflict, and no indication that Rosa anticipated any danger before crossing the threshold. According to prosecutors, the crime began with deception, escalated into attempted sexual violence, transformed into a desperate physical struggle, and ended with deliberate lethal force. Every stage of that sequence was supported by forensic evidence, witness testimony, and the suspect's own admissions that he had killed Rosa, although his explanations for why he committed the crime would later change repeatedly during questioning. The issue of sexual assault became one of the most carefully discussed aspects of the investigation. Early public reports created widespread assumptions that Rosa had been raped before being killed. However, the forensic evidence required greater precision. The autopsy did not establish that a completed rape had occurred. Prosecutors instead argued that the available evidence demonstrated an attempted sexual assault and that Rosa was killed while resisting that attack. This distinction remained important throughout the judicial proceedings because it reflected the conclusions supported by the forensic investigation rather than public speculation. Even so, the absence of evidence proving a completed sexual assault did nothing to diminish the violence of the crime or the extraordinary courage investigators believed Rosa displayed during her final moments. According to the prosecution, every indication pointed toward a young woman who fought with all her strength against an attacker determined to overpower her. Her resistance was not merely inferred from assumptions, but supported by the condition of the apartment and the physical evidence documented by investigators. In many ways, the crime scene became a silent testimony to Rosa's determination to survive. When investigators eventually reconstructed those final minutes, they did not describe a passive victim. Instead, they describe a young woman whose instinct was to defend herself until she no longer could. Those final moments inside the apartment would soon become the focus of one of Italy's most closely followed homicide investigations, as Rosa's family desperately searched for her without realizing that she was only a few meters away, hidden behind the closed door of the tenant's apartment where the unimaginable had already taken place. As the violence inside the ground floor apartment came to an end, silence settled over the building once again. The struggle that investigators would later reconstruct through forensic evidence had already taken place behind a closed door, hidden from the ordinary life continuing outside. Residents moved through the neighborhood unaware that a devastating crime had just occurred. Nothing visible from the courtyard could reveal the horror concealed inside the apartment. For Rosa Alfieri's family, the afternoon still appeared to be following its familiar routine. They expected her to return home after finishing work, just as she always had. There was no immediate reason to suspect that anything had gone wrong. Every ordinary minute that passed without concern would later become painful in retrospect. Because while her loved ones waited for her, Rosa was already beyond help only a short distance away. According to investigators, after killing Rosa, Elpidio Dambra did not remain at the scene. Instead, prosecutors reconstructed a sequence of actions suggesting that he sought to leave the area quickly. Before anyone realized what had happened, he had already begun distancing himself from the apartment where the crime had occurred. Inside the building, however, Rosa's absence gradually became impossible to ignore. Her family knew her habits well. She was responsible, dependable, and not someone who disappeared without explanation. As time passed, and she failed to appear, concern slowly replaced the assumption that she had simply been delayed. What began as ordinary uncertainty soon evolved into genuine fear. Like many families confronted with an unexpected disappearance, the first response was not to imagine the worst, but to search for simple explanations. Perhaps she had stopped somewhere unexpectedly or become occupied with an unforeseen task. Yet, as those possibilities faded, anxiety grew stronger. Rosa's father ultimately decided to search the building himself. It was the most logical place to begin. She had been expected home, and if she had returned, there seemed little reason for her to be anywhere else. The familiarity of the building meant that every apartment, hallway, and shared space could be checked quickly. At that moment, no one could have imagined that the answer lay behind the door of the newest tenant's apartment. Investigators later determined that Rosa had never left the building after arriving home. Her father moved through the property searching for any indication of where his daughter might be. As his search continued, attention eventually turned toward Dambra's apartment. Something about the circumstances prompted further concern. Whether through observations made during the search or growing intuition that something was seriously wrong, Rosa's father reached the point where the apartment became impossible to ignore. What followed was one of the most heartbreaking moments in the entire case. Inside the bathroom of the tenant's apartment, Rosa's father discovered his daughter. She was partially undressed and lifeless. The scene before him instantly erased every remaining hope that she might still be alive. Few experiences can equal the unimaginable pain of a parent finding a child under such circumstances. The apartment that had appeared completely ordinary from the outside concealed an act of extraordinary violence within. For Rosa's father, the discovery marked the beginning of a grief that would never truly end. Every expectation of welcoming his daughter home after work was replaced within seconds by a reality too devastating to comprehend. Emergency services were contacted immediately, and police officers soon arrived at the scene. What confronted investigators was no longer a missing person case, but a homicide investigation. The apartment was secured, and forensic specialists began the painstaking process of documenting every aspect of the crime scene. Every object, every biological trace, every fingerprint, and every indication of struggle would later contribute to reconstructing Rosa's final moments. At the same time, officers worked to identify and locate the tenant who had been living in the apartment where Rosa's body had been found. News of the crime spread rapidly through Grumo Navano. In communities where neighbors know one another personally, violent crimes carry an especially profound emotional impact. Residents struggled to understand how such brutality could occur inside a building they regarded as part of an ordinary residential neighborhood. Many people already knew Rosa by sight or through everyday interactions. Others recognized her family or had visited local businesses where she worked. The murder, therefore, felt intensely personal, extending far beyond the immediate relatives who had suffered the direct loss. Shock quickly turned into mourning. Conversations throughout the town centered on the same painful questions. How could something like this happen here? How could a young woman be killed inside her own home building? How could a tenant who had arrived only weeks earlier become responsible for such unimaginable violence? These questions echoed not only within Grumo Navano, but across Italy as national media began reporting the details of the investigation. The circumstances of the crime deeply unsettled the public because they challenged one of society's most basic assumptions, that home should be the safest place a person can return after work. Instead, Rosa had encountered fatal danger only moments after stepping into the building where she had lived for years. Investigators recognized that the emotional response surrounding the case stemmed not only from the brutality of the murder, but also from the betrayal of trust that it represented. The suspect was not an unknown intruder breaking into the property from outside. According to prosecutors, he was someone who had been welcomed into the building as a tenant. That distinction transformed the case into more than a homicide investigation. It became a reminder that violence can emerge from relationships built upon ordinary assumptions of safety and familiarity. While Rosa's family confronted the overwhelming reality of their loss, police officers were already working urgently to locate the suspect. Every passing hour increased the importance of finding him before he could disappear completely. Investigators collected witness statements, secured evidence, and rapidly distributed photographs to law enforcement agencies involved in the search. The efficiency of those early investigative efforts would soon prove crucial. Unknown to the grieving family, Dambra had already left the immediate area after the killing. According to investigators, he attempted to continue moving through Naples, creating physical distance between himself and the crime scene. Yet despite his efforts, the search for him was progressing rapidly. Police officers now possessed a clear objective: identify his movements, determine his location, and bring him into custody before additional time complicated the investigation. Meanwhile, forensic teams remained inside the apartment, preserving every piece of evidence capable of explaining what had happened during Rosa's final moments. The bathroom where her father had discovered her became one of the most carefully examined locations. In the investigation, scientific analysis would eventually support the prosecution's reconstruction that Rosa had fought desperately against an attempted sexual assault before dying from mechanical asphyxia. But at that early stage, investigators focused first on preserving the integrity of the crime scene, knowing that every detail documented that day could later become decisive in court. As evening approached, Grumo Navano had already changed forever. A young woman known for her kindness and quiet determination had lost her life in circumstances almost impossible to comprehend. Her family had endured unimaginable heartbreak, and an entire community struggled to accept that such violence had occurred within one of its own residential buildings. Yet while grief spread throughout the town, the investigation itself was entering a new phase. The suspect was still alive, still moving through Naples, and entirely unaware that the search for him was closing in. Within hours, an unexpected encounter at a local hospital would bring his brief attempt to escape to an abrupt end and provide investigators with the opportunity to begin uncovering the full truth behind one of Italy's most disturbing criminal cases. While investigators secured the crime scene inside the Alfieri family's apartment building, the man accused of killing Rosa Alfieri was already putting physical distance between himself and Grumo Navano. According to the reconstruction presented during the investigation, Elpidio Dambra did not remain in the apartment after the murder or attempt to report what had happened. Instead, prosecutors argued that he began a deliberate sequence of movements intended to leave the area before police could identify and locate him. Those hours immediately following the crime became an important focus of the investigation because they provided insight into his actions after Rose's death and helped authorities establish a detailed timeline supported by witness accounts, surveillance information, and his own later statements. Investigators concluded that after the attack, Dambra first changed his clothes, although the precise motivation could only be inferred from the circumstances. Changing clothing after a violent crime naturally became an important element of the prosecution's reconstruction. Detectives considered every action performed after Rose's death as part of the broader sequence, demonstrating awareness of what had occurred inside the apartment. Once he had changed, Dambra left the building and made his way toward public transportation. According to investigators, he boarded a train heading toward Naples. The journey itself was not especially long, but every minute mattered because Rose's family had not yet discovered her body, while relatives were only beginning to realize that something was wrong. The suspect was already traveling away from the scene of the crime. The contrast between these parallel events would later become one of the most striking aspects of the timeline. Inside the apartment building, Rose's loved ones searched desperately for answers. Outside, the man accused of killing her was moving through the city as though attempting to resume ordinary life. After arriving in Naples, Dambra's movements appeared unusual when viewed collectively. According to investigators, he purchased a scratch lottery ticket. On its own, the purchase seemed almost insignificant, one of countless ordinary transactions taking place every day throughout Italy. Yet investigators documented it because it helped establish his precise movements following the murder. Criminal investigations often rely on seemingly minor details to reconstruct an accurate chronology, and every confirmed location strengthened the prosecution's understanding of where the suspect had traveled after leaving Grimognano. From there, prosecutors stated that he continued his journey by taxi. Again, this movement formed another piece of the timeline rather than an isolated event. Police worked methodically to identify each location he visited, ensuring that no significant gap remained between the crime scene and his eventual arrest. Investigators believed that tracing his movements would not only establish his whereabouts, but also demonstrate that he remained capable of making decisions and navigating through the city after the killing. This would later become relevant when the defense argued that his mental condition and drug use affected his criminal responsibility. According to investigators, one of Dambra's next actions was purchasing drugs. This detail became particularly important because drug use would later emerge as one of the central themes of the defense strategy during the legal proceedings. Throughout the investigation and subsequent trial, Dambra repeatedly referred to drugs while attempting to explain his actions. He suggested that narcotics had influenced his mental state and contributed to the events that unfolded inside the apartment. Prosecutors, however, argued that the sequence of his actions after the murder reflected purposeful behavior rather than complete psychological disorganization. They pointed to the organized nature of his movements, his ability to travel across the city, obtain transportation, make purchases, and continue making decisions after leaving the crime scene. According to the prosecution, these actions demonstrated that despite any drug use, he retained the capacity to understand and direct his conduct. Eventually, Dambra's drug consumption reportedly caused him to become physically unwell. According to investigators, his deteriorating condition led him to seek medical assistance at San Paolo Hospital in Naples. It was an unexpected decision that would dramatically alter the course of the investigation. Hospitals routinely receive patients experiencing a wide range of medical emergencies, and Dambra S.'s arrival initially appeared unrelated to the homicide investigation unfolding in Grumman, Nevada. Yet by the time he entered the hospital, police agencies had already begun circulating his photograph following the discovery of Rosa's body. Officers throughout the region had been alerted to the urgent search for the tenant who had disappeared after the crime. This rapid distribution of information proved decisive. While Dambra remained inside the hospital, 2 police officers recognized him from the circulated photographs. Their observation transformed what might otherwise have been an ordinary medical visit into the final stage of an active homicide investigation. Recognizing the significance of the identification, the officers acted immediately. Dambra was taken into custody before he could leave the hospital. The arrest occurred only hours after Rosa's body had been discovered, preventing any further attempt to disappear or travel beyond the reach of investigators. For law enforcement, the speed of the arrest represented a critical achievement. Early apprehension reduced the possibility of evidence being lost, witnesses becoming more difficult to locate, or the suspect leaving the country. It also allowed investigators to begin questioning him while the events of February first remained relatively recent. Once in police custody, Dambra faced intensive questioning regarding the events inside the apartment. During the initial stages of interrogation, he admitted that he had killed Rosa. This admission immediately became one of the most significant developments in the investigation. However, while acknowledging responsibility for the killing, he repeatedly altered his explanations regarding why it had occurred. As investigators continued questioning him, different versions of events emerged. At various points, Dambra claimed that drugs had heavily influenced his actions. On other occasions, he asserted that he had heard voices instructing him to kill Rosa. He also stated that his memory of the incident was incomplete, suggesting that he could not fully remember everything that had happened inside the apartment. These changing explanations became a major point of interest for prosecutors. Investigators carefully compared each statement with the physical evidence recovered from crime scene. Rather than relying solely on Dambra's account, they examined fingerprints, biological traces, forensic findings, witness testimony, and the timeline established through independent evidence. This approach ensured that the reconstruction of the crime rested primarily on objective facts, rather than on statements that shifted over time. The inconsistencies in Dambra's explanations would later play an important role during the trial. Prosecutors argued that his repeated changes reflected attempts to minimize responsibility rather than reliable recollections of the events. The defense, meanwhile, emphasized his history of drug use and his claimed psychological disturbances, arguing that these factors significantly impaired his mental state during the offense. Because of these competing interpretations, psychiatric experts were appointed to evaluate Dambra's condition. Their assessment became one of the most closely examined aspects of the judicial proceedings. Specialists considered his reported drug use, his claims of hearing voices, and his overall psychological functioning before reaching their conclusions. Ultimately, according to the findings presented during the trial, psychiatric experts determined that Dambra remained criminally responsible for his actions. They concluded that despite any influence of drugs, he possessed the capacity to understand the nature of his conduct and control his behavior at the time of the offense. This conclusion significantly strengthened the prosecution's case and undermined attempts to reduce his legal responsibility on psychiatric grounds. While investigators continued building the evidentiary record, Rosa's family confronted the painful reality that the suspect had already confessed to taking her life. Yet many questions still required answers. Exactly how had this struggle unfolded inside the apartment? What sequence of events led from an apparently ordinary encounter to a fatal attack? How did the forensic evidence support the prosecution's conclusion that Rosa had been killed while resisting an attempted sexual assault? Answering those questions required far more than a confession. It required one of the most detailed forensic reconstructions of the entire investigation. Scientists, detectives, medical experts, and prosecutors would spend months examining every available piece of evidence to ensure that the courtroom would hear not speculation or assumption, but a carefully documented account supported by objective findings. Only through that meticulous investigative process could the full truth of Rosa Alfieri's final moments be presented before the Italian justice system. With Elpidio D'Ambra in police custody and the immediate search successfully concluded, the investigation entered its most meticulous phase. Although the suspect had admitted to killing Rosa Alfieri, a confession alone could never answer every question surrounding such a serious crime. Investigators needed to establish precisely what had happened inside the apartment, determine whether every physical finding supported the suspect's statements, identify any inconsistencies in his various explanations, and ensure that the reconstruction presented in court rested upon verifiable evidence rather than assumption. Every homicide investigation demands this level of scrutiny, but the circumstances of Rosa's death required an especially careful approach because prosecutors intended to demonstrate not only that D'Ambra had killed her, but that she had been murdered while resisting an attempted sexual assault. That conclusion carried enormous legal significance and therefore had to be supported by objective forensic findings. The apartment where the crime occurred became the focal point of the investigation. Forensic specialists spent extensive time documenting every room before any object was moved. Photographs, measurements, biological samples, fingerprints, and trace evidence were collected according to established investigative procedures. Rather than viewing the apartment as a single crime scene, investigators examined it as a sequence of interconnected events. Every disturbed object, every mark left behind during the struggle, and every biological trace became part of a larger effort to reconstruct the final minutes of Rosa's life. According to the prosecution, the physical condition of the apartment demonstrated that a violent confrontation had taken place rather than a brief or accidental altercation. Furniture and objects were no longer positioned as they would have been during ordinary daily life. Their displacement supported the conclusion that Rosa fought intensely against her attacker. Investigators emphasized that crime scenes often preserve silent evidence of movement. Unlike eyewitness testimony, physical evidence cannot become confused by emotion or memory. Every broken pattern, every transferred biological trace, and every fingerprint remains fixed until investigators recover and interpret it. In Rosa's case, those physical findings consistently pointed toward prolonged resistance. The forensic examination extended far beyond visual observation. Specialists collected DNA evidence from multiple locations inside the apartment, comparing biological traces to establish where both Rosa and D'Ambra had been during different stages of the struggle. Fingerprints were examined to determine movements within the apartment, while additional trace evidence helped investigators understand how the confrontation developed from one area of the residence to another. Together, these findings created a reconstruction that prosecutors argued was internally consistent and scientifically reliable. At the same time, investigators examined D'Ambra's own movements before and after the crime. Telephone data, witness accounts, and the timeline established through his travel to Naples were compared against the physical evidence recovered from the apartment. This process allowed detectives to confirm that the sequence of events described by prosecutors aligned with independently verifiable facts, rather than relying upon D'Ambra's changing explanations. Investigators treated every statement he made as one piece of information to be tested against objective evidence. This distinction became increasingly important as the interrogation continued. During questioning, D'Ambra admitted killing Rosa. That admission removed one of the most fundamental questions confronting investigators. But it did not eliminate the need to determine motive, intent, and the precise sequence of events. As interviews progressed, his explanations shifted repeatedly. At various times, he claimed that he had been under the influence of drugs, that he had heard voices instructing him to kill, and that he could not fully remember what had happened inside the apartment. These changing accounts presented investigators with a challenge familiar in many homicide cases. Confessions are valuable, but they must always be evaluated alongside physical evidence rather than accepted without scrutiny. Detectives carefully compared each version of events against the forensic findings collected from the apartment, where Dambrieux's statements conflicted with the objective evidence. Investigators relied upon the physical record rather than his recollections. This methodical approach strengthened the credibility of the prosecution's reconstruction because it demonstrated that their conclusions did not depend solely upon the suspect's testimony. Instead, they rested upon measurable scientific findings that remained consistent regardless of how Dambrieux later attempted to explain his actions. One of the most carefully examined issues throughout the investigation involved the nature of the sexual violence prosecutors believed had motivated the attack. Early reports generated widespread public belief that Rosa had been raped before being killed. Such assumptions spread rapidly during the first days after the murder, fueled by understandable public outrage and incomplete information. However, investigators were obligated to distinguish between public perception and medically supported conclusions. The autopsy became central to answering this question. Forensic pathologists conducted a comprehensive examination to determine the cause of death and identify any evidence relating to sexual assault. Their findings confirmed that Rosa died from mechanical asphyxia caused by strangulation. The injuries documented during the examination were consistent with a violent struggle, reconstructed from the apartment itself. At the same time, however, the autopsy did not establish that a completed rape had occurred. This conclusion required investigators and prosecutors to present the facts with precision, rather than alleging conduct unsupported by the forensic evidence. Prosecutors argued that Rosa had been killed while resisting an attempted sexual assault. They based this conclusion upon the totality of the evidence, rather than upon any single forensic finding. The condition of the apartment, Rosa's injuries, the circumstances under which she entered the apartment, and the physical evidence documenting a sustained struggle all supported their interpretation that Dambrieux intended to commit sexual violence, but murdered Rosa when she resisted. This careful distinction remained important throughout the judicial proceedings because it reflected the principle that criminal charges must correspond to evidence rather than speculation. For Rosa's family, however, the precise legal terminology did little to lessen the tragedy they had experienced, whether the assault had been completed or interrupted by Rosa's resistance. The essential reality remained unchanged. She had lost her life while defending herself against an act of extreme violence. Investigators repeatedly emphasized that the evidence portrayed Rosa not as a passive victim, but as someone who resisted with extraordinary determination. Every indication suggested that she fought to escape until she was physically unable to continue. The condition of the apartment reflected movement, struggle, and desperate resistance rather than submission. In many respects, the forensic reconstruction became a silent testimony to Rosa's courage during her final moments. Another major aspect of the investigation involved evaluating Dambrieux's mental condition. Because he repeatedly referred to drugs and claimed to hear voices, psychiatric experts were appointed to conduct a comprehensive assessment. Their responsibility was not to determine whether he had committed the crime. That question had already been answered through the evidence, but to evaluate whether he possessed the legal capacity to understand and control his actions at the time of the offense. The psychiatric evaluation considered multiple factors, including his personal history, reported drug use, behavior following the crime, and statements made during interrogation. Experts also examined the organized sequence of actions that occurred after Rosa's death, including changing clothes, traveling by train, purchasing a scratch ticket, taking a taxi, buying drugs, and eventually seeking medical treatment. Prosecutors argued that these actions demonstrated purposeful decision-making inconsistent with complete psychological incapacity. After reviewing all available information, the psychiatric experts reached a conclusion that would become highly significant during the trial. They determined that Dambra remained criminally responsible for his actions, although drug use may have influenced aspects of his behavior. They concluded that he retained the ability to understand the nature and consequences of what he was doing. This finding substantially weakened the defense's efforts to argue diminished responsibility and reinforced the prosecution's position that the murder had been committed by someone capable of making conscious decisions throughout the course of the crime. By the conclusion of the investigation, prosecutors believed they had assembled a comprehensive and coherent reconstruction supported by multiple independent forms of evidence. Fingerprints, DNA, biological traces, witness testimony, telephone data, medical findings, crime scene analysis, and the suspect's own admissions all pointed toward the same sequence of events. According to their case, Rosa Alfieri returned home after work, encountered the recently arrived tenant, entered his apartment after he invented a reason to bring her inside, resisted an attempted sexual assault with remarkable determination, and was ultimately murdered by mechanical asphyxia when her attacker failed to overcome that resistance. The suspect then attempted to leave the area before being identified and arrested only hours later at San Paulo Hospital. With the investigative phase complete and the evidentiary record firmly established, the focus shifted from police headquarters and forensic laboratories to the courtroom. There, prosecutors and defense attorneys would present competing interpretations of the evidence before the Italian justice system, and judges would ultimately determine whether Elpidio Dambra should spend the rest of his life in prison for the murder of Rosa Alfieri. With the investigation completed and prosecutors confident that the evidence presented a clear reconstruction of the events, the Rosa Alfieri case moved into the Italian judicial system. The transition from police investigation to courtroom proceedings marked a new chapter in the search for justice. While investigators had spent months collecting forensic evidence, interviewing witnesses, and reconstructing the timeline of February 1st, 2022, it was now the responsibility of the courts to evaluate every piece of that evidence under the standards required by law. The legal process would determine not only whether Elpidio Dambra was guilty of the crimes alleged by the prosecution, but also whether any circumstances existed that might reduce his criminal responsibility. For Rosa's family, the trial represented an emotionally exhausting experience. Every hearing required them to revisit the details of a tragedy that had already transformed their lives forever. Every forensic report, every witness statement, and every legal argument brought them back to the afternoon when they lost a daughter whose future had been stolen in a matter of minutes. Yet despite the emotional burden, the judicial process remained essential. It offered the opportunity to establish responsibility through evidence rather than emotion, and to ensure that the final verdict reflected the facts uncovered during the investigation. Prosecutors entered the courtroom with a case built upon multiple independent forms of evidence. They did not rely solely upon Dambra's confession because they recognized that his explanations had changed repeatedly during interrogation. Instead, they presented what they argued was a coherent reconstruction supported by forensic science, medical findings, witness testimony, biological evidence, fingerprints, DNA analysis, and the timeline established through his movements after the crime. According to the prosecution, these different forms of evidence consistently pointed toward the same conclusion. Rosa had returned home after work, encountered the recently arrived tenant, entered his apartment after he persuaded her to do so under false pretenses, resisted an attempted sexual assault, and was murdered by mechanical asphyxia when her resistance prevented the attack from succeeding. Prosecutors argued that the physical condition of the apartment demonstrated the intensity of Rosa's struggle. Objects displaced throughout the residence, biological traces recovered from multiple locations, and the injuries documented during the autopsy all supported the conclusion that she fought desperately for her life. Medical experts explained how the injuries observed during the post-mortem examination were consistent with manual strangulation followed by the use of a pillowcase around her neck. The official cause of death, mechanical asphyxia, remained one of the strongest scientific foundations of the prosecution's case. They also emphasized the significance of Dambria's conduct after the murder. According to prosecutors, his decision to change clothes, leave the building, travel to Naples, purchase a scratch ticket, take a taxi, buy drugs, and eventually seek treatment at San Paolo Hospital demonstrated purposeful behavior rather than complete psychological incapacity. These actions, they argued, reflected an individual capable of making decisions and understanding the consequences of his conduct. The prosecution therefore rejected any suggestion that drug use eliminated his criminal responsibility. Instead, they maintained that although narcotics may have been present, they did not prevent Dambra from acting intentionally before, during, or after the crime. The defense approached the case from a different perspective. Rather than disputing that Dambra had caused Rosa's death, defense attorneys focused primarily on his mental condition at the time of the offense. Throughout the investigation, Dambra had repeatedly referred to drug use and claimed that he heard voices instructing him to kill. He also stated that he could not fully remember the events that had unfolded inside the apartment. The defense argued that these factors should be considered when evaluating his criminal responsibility. They suggested that his psychological condition and substance abuse significantly affected his ability to control his actions during the attack. As a result, psychiatric evidence became one of the most important aspects of the trial. Independent psychiatric experts evaluated Dambra in detail, examining his personal history, psychological functioning, reported hallucinations, and behavior before and after the crime. Their task was not to determine whether he had committed the murder, but to answer a narrower legal question. Was he capable of understanding the nature and consequences of his actions at the time he killed Rosa Alfieri? The experts reviewed extensive medical and investigative material before reaching their conclusions. Ultimately, the psychiatric evaluation did not support the defense's request for diminished criminal responsibility. According to the findings presented before the court, Dambra remained capable of understanding what he was doing and of controlling his behavior despite his reported drug use. The experts concluded that he was legally responsible for his actions. This assessment significantly reinforced the prosecution's position because it addressed one of the principal arguments raised by the defense. If the court accepted the psychiatric conclusions, there would be little basis for reducing his sentence on mental health grounds. Another issue carefully addressed during the proceedings concerned the nature of the sexual violence involved in the case. Public discussion had frequently referred to Rosa as having been raped before being killed. However, prosecutors maintained the distinction established during the investigation. The autopsy had not demonstrated that a completed rape had occurred. Instead, the prosecution argued that the available evidence established an attempted sexual assault and that Rosa had been murdered while resisting it. The court evaluated this conclusion based upon the totality of the evidence rather than on speculation or assumptions circulating outside the courtroom. This careful approach reflected the broader principle that criminal verdicts must rest upon proven facts rather than public perception. Throughout the proceedings, Rosa's courage remained an unspoken but undeniable presence. Although she could no longer describe what had happened inside the apartment, the physical evidence documented her determination to resist. Prosecutors repeatedly emphasized that the condition of the apartment demonstrated prolonged struggle rather than passive submission. In many respects, the forensic evidence allowed Rosa's final actions to speak on her behalf. The court heard how she fought to defend herself against an attack that investigators believed was intended to become a sexual assault. That evidence became central to understanding both the violence of the crime and the extraordinary resistance she displayed until the very end. After considering the evidence presented by both sides, the court reached its decision. On April 12, 2023, Elpidio Dambra was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. The sentence reflected the court's acceptance of the prosecution's reconstruction of the crime and its rejection of the defense's arguments regarding diminished responsibility. For Rosa's family, the verdict could never restore the daughter they had lost, but it represented formal recognition of the responsibility borne by the man who had taken her life. The judgment also affirmed the extensive investigative work conducted by police officers, forensic scientists, medical experts, and prosecutors throughout the previous year. Following the conviction, Dambra exercised his legal right to appeal. Appeals form an essential part of the Italian judicial system, ensuring that convictions undergo further legal scrutiny before becoming final. During the appellate proceedings, the defense again challenged aspects of the original judgment, including issues related to Dambra's mental condition and criminal responsibility. The appellate court carefully reviewed the evidence, the psychiatric evaluations, and the legal reasoning underlying the first verdict. After examining the record, the court upheld the original judgment. On December 12, 2023, the life sentence imposed upon Elpidio Dambra was confirmed. With the appeal rejected, the principal legal proceedings reached their conclusion. The courts had determined that the evidence proved beyond the required legal standard that Dambra intentionally murdered Rosa Alfieri after attempting to sexually assault her, and that he remained fully responsible for his actions despite his claims concerning drugs and psychological disturbance. For the Italian justice system, the case had reached its legal conclusion. For Rosa's family and the community of Grumo Navano, however, no judicial decision could erase the grief left behind. The courtroom could establish guilt and impose punishment, but it could never restore the ordinary afternoon that had been shattered forever on February 1st, 2022. The legacy of Rosa Alfieri would ultimately extend beyond the verdict itself, becoming part of a broader national conversation about women's safety, trust within familiar environments, and the lasting consequences of violence that can transform an ordinary home into the scene of unimaginable tragedy. Every true crime case eventually reaches a point where the legal process comes to an end. Courtrooms empty, appeals are exhausted, evidence is archived, and official records preserve the facts for future generations. Yet for the families left behind, there is no equivalent ending. Their lives continue long after the headlines disappear, shaped by an absence that never truly fades. The story of Rosa Alfieri is one of those cases where justice, although significant and necessary, cannot restore what violence has taken away. On paper, the Italian justice system reached its conclusion. Elpidio Dambra was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment, and that sentence was later upheld on appeal. The courts examined the forensic evidence, heard expert testimony, evaluated psychiatric assessments, and determined that he bore full criminal responsibility for Rosa's death. From a legal perspective, accountability had been established. But no sentence, regardless of its severity, can return a daughter to her parents, a partner to the person who loved her, or a familiar smile to the streets of the town where she once lived. Rosa Alfieri was only 23 years old. She was not known because of wealth, political influence, or celebrity. She became known because an ordinary life was interrupted by extraordinary violence. Before February 1st, 2022, she was simply a young woman who worked hard, helped in her boyfriend's tobacco shop, returned home each evening, and looked forward to the future. Those ordinary details matter because they remind us that victims of violent crime are far more than the circumstances of their deaths. They are individuals whose lives contain thousands of quiet moments that never appear in court, documents, or newspaper articles. Rosa had dreams that were never fulfilled, conversations that would never happen, birthdays that would never be celebrated, and plans that ended the moment she entered an apartment she believed was safe. It is often tempting to remember victims only through the tragedy that made their names recognizable. But doing so risks allowing violence to define their entire existence. Rosa deserves to be remembered first as the person she was before becoming the victim of crime. One of the reasons this case resonated so deeply across Italy was the setting in which it occurred. The danger did not emerge from an isolated road late at night or from a place commonly associated with crime. According to the investigation, it unfolded inside the very building where Rosa lived with her family. The suspect was not an unknown stranger forcing his way into the property, but a tenant who had recently rented an apartment there. That fact profoundly unsettled public opinion because it challenged one of the most basic assumptions shared by people everywhere, that home is the place where we are safest. Every day, millions of people return home believing they have left the uncertainties of the outside world behind them. The Rosa Alfieri case demonstrated, in the most painful way imaginable, that trust can sometimes be exploited by those who appear familiar. It reminded communities that danger does not always announce itself through obvious warning signs. Sometimes it arrives quietly, occupying an ordinary apartment, exchanging ordinary greetings, and blending into everyday life until a single irreversible moment changes everything. At the same time, the investigation also highlighted another important truth. Throughout the legal proceedings, prosecutors argued that Rosa lost her life while resisting an attempted sexual assault. The forensic evidence presented in court portrayed not passive acceptance, but determined resistance. Although no one can know every thought that passed through her mind during those final moments, the physical evidence documented a struggle that investigators described as intense and sustained. That evidence became a silent testament to her courage. Rosa fought for her life until she no longer could, remembering that courage does not glorify violence. Instead, it honors the determination of someone confronted with unimaginable circumstances who refused to surrender without resistance. Cases involving violence against women often become part of broader conversations about prevention, responsibility, and public awareness. The murder of Rosa Alfieri encouraged renewed discussion in Italy regarding women's safety and the importance of recognizing that threats can sometimes emerge in familiar environments rather than distant or unfamiliar places. It also reinforced the necessity of thorough criminal investigations grounded in scientific evidence. Throughout this case, forensic specialists, medical examiners, detectives, prosecutors, and the courts worked carefully to distinguish proven facts from speculation. They resisted pressure to rely upon assumptions, instead allowing fingerprints, DNA, biological traces, witness testimony, and medical findings to establish the truth. That commitment to evidence ensured that the judicial outcome rested upon objective investigation, rather than public emotion alone. Such diligence remains essential in every criminal case because justice depends not only upon punishment, but upon accuracy. The legacy of Rosa Alfieri also reminds us of the invisible burden carried by victims' families long. After public attention fades, news coverage eventually moves to other stories. Court proceedings conclude. New cases emerge. But parents do not stop being parents after a funeral. And families do not stop remembering those they have lost simply because legal proceedings have ended. For Rosa's loved ones, every ordinary occasion, a holiday, a birthday, a family gathering, will forever include the awareness that someone is missing. Their grief exists beyond the pages of legal judgments and newspaper archives. It becomes part of everyday life, quietly accompanying each passing year. Perhaps that is one of the most important lessons true crime stories can offer when told responsibly. They're not merely accounts of violence or investigations. At their best, they remind us of the value of human life, the importance of justice, and the lasting consequences that a single criminal act can impose upon countless innocent people. Every victim leaves behind relationships, memories, ambitions, and futures that can never be replaced. Every family carries forward a story forever divided into two parts: life before the crime and life after it. Rosa Alfieri's story belongs to that painful reality. As listeners, readers, or observers, we have a responsibility to remember that behind every investigation is a real person whose life mattered long before it became evidence in a courtroom. If there is one final image worth holding on to, it should not be the crime scene, the courtroom, or the headlines that followed. It should be the image of a young woman returning home after an ordinary day at work, expecting nothing more than the comfort and familiarity of the place where she had always felt safe. That ordinary moment, tragically interrupted by violence, reminds us how precious and fragile everyday life truly is. The case of Rosa Alfieri continues to stand as a solemn reminder of the importance of justice, the necessity of protecting the vulnerable, and the enduring dignity of those whose voices can no longer speak for themselves. Though her life was cut tragically short, her story remains a call to remember the human being behind the case, to value truth over speculation, and to recognize that every victim deserves not only justice in the courtroom, but also remembrance marked by compassion, respect, and humanity. As we close this story, may Rosa Alfieri be remembered not simply for the violence that ended her life, but for the life she lived before that violence, for the courage reflected in the evidence of her final struggle, and for the enduring reminder that every ordinary day, every ordinary home, and every ordinary person carries a value beyond measure. Thank you for listening, and until our next case, remember that behind every true crime story lies a real human life, deserving of truth, dignity, and never to be forgotten. Thank you for staying with us through the story of Rosa Alfieri. Cases like this leave behind more than court records or newspaper archives. They leave questions about trust, vulnerability, justice, and the fragile nature of ordinary life. Throughout this investigation, every stage of the process, from the discovery of the crime to the forensic reconstruction and the final verdict, served one purpose: to establish the truth as accurately and responsibly as possible. That truth revealed a young woman who returned home after work expecting nothing more than another ordinary evening with her family, only to become the victim of a brutal act of violence committed inside the building where she had always felt safe. It also revealed the dedication of investigators, forensic experts, prosecutors, and the courts, whose careful work ensured that the evidence, not speculation, rumor, or emotion, formed the foundation of justice. True crime should never exist simply to shock or entertain. Behind every investigation is a real person, a grieving family, and a community forever changed by loss. Rosa Alfieri was not defined by the circumstances of her death. She was a daughter, a partner, a co-worker, and a young woman with hopes, routines, and dreams that ended far too soon. Remembering her means looking beyond the crime itself and recognizing the humanity that existed long before her name became known across Italy. It also reminds us that violence against women is not an abstract issue discussed only in statistics or legal reports. Every number represents a real individual whose absence continues to shape the lives of those left behind. The Rosa Alfieri case encourages reflection on the importance of respecting personal boundaries, recognizing that danger can sometimes come from unexpected places, and supporting a justice system that relies on careful investigation and objective evidence. It is a reminder that trust, while essential to everyday life, should never prevent society from remaining vigilant against those who seek to exploit it. At the same time, it highlights the extraordinary courage shown by victims who resist violence even when the odds are overwhelmingly against them. Although Rosa can no longer tell her own story, the evidence examined during the investigation ensured that her final struggle was not forgotten. Her determination became part of the historical record, preserved through the work of professionals committed to uncovering the truth. As this episode comes to an end, we hope it has honored Rosa's memory with the dignity and respect every victim deserves. If stories like this matter, it is not because they reveal the darkest parts of human behavior, but because they remind us of the value of compassion, justice, and every ordinary life that deserves to be protected. Thank you for listening and for taking the time to remember Rosa Alfieri, not only as the victim of a tragic crime, but as a young woman whose life mattered. If you appreciate carefully researched, respectful, true crime storytelling that focuses on verified facts and the people behind the headlines, consider following the podcast so you won't miss future episodes. Your support allows these stories to continue being told with accuracy, empathy, and respect for those whose voices can no longer be heard. Until next time, stay safe, take care of one another, and remember that behind every case file is a human life whose story deserves to be remembered with truth, compassion, and dignity.